Hello, welcome back to my channel. It's Emma. Yeah, there were a lot of pages this month. I've just sat down to film my August wrap up. There's gonna be a lot of books discussed in this video, almost all of them. The books that I got through this month were audiobooks, which is great. I'm also filming a bit later in the day than I normally do, so if you hear a lot of traffic, it's probably people getting very angry as they wait to get home from work. This is probably going to turn into a very long video because we all know that I ramble so much and I talk a lot about books, and this time we've got a lot of books to talk about. So I am just gonna take my time. I'm feeling very cozy. I've got cinnamon orange tea that is just cooling down, waiting for me to drink it. I also wanted to include some different things in my wrap up for a change. So I've actually started to compile a list of new vocabulary that I learned from every book that I read. For this kind of vocabulary thing, I'll just say I think what my favorite word was that I learned from each book that I read. I had a lot of words in English that I didn't know from a lot of these books, and it's very interesting because I think going through like a French immersion education for all of your life and not really being exposed to a lot of words that people use every day or for very specific subjects and things, like having all of your subjects in school be in French, it's very interesting to be like an adult now and learning new words that everyone around you already knows. See, I'm saying there's a lot of vocab I've missed out my whole life on, but that people around me just know. Because like when your only subject in school is English that's taught in English, it's kind of like, what is the word for, what the hell is an awning? Do you know what an awning is? What's an awning? What's a cupola? A cupola? Cupola? Do you know what that is? I think it's the thing that sticks out, right? The awning. It's like an overhang or something. Yes, some feature of architecture. Like I can speak English. I'm speaking English, but there's just some words that I've missed out my whole life on. Anyway, I just included my favorites, my top 1 or 2 favorites from the books that I read and some of the books I didn't get any new words from, but that's okay. I think as usual, I'm just gonna start with my favorite book of the month and then we'll make our way through the books in some maybe organized fashion. I don't really know, but let's get started. Okay, wait, so can we do Oh my gosh, it tastes like the fall. Okay, where should I put this? That's very precarious. Let's not knock it down. All right, so my favorite book of the month actually ended up being Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. This is actually a 2020 release as well, so that's quite exciting. I think for Mexican Gothic, yeah, let's just start with a fun word. So the word I learned from this book, my favorite one, I guess, was mawkish. Mawkish. So apparently mawkish can either mean sentimental in an exaggerated or false way, or it can also mean having a faint, sickly flavor. Very interesting. I also did a little bit of research on each word. So mawkish is first put down in the 17th century from the obsolete word mock in English, which meant maggot way back then, which is so cool. And if you've read Mexican Gothic, there's a lot of like very disgusting things. So I love that that word was in here. And then from there, mawkish stems from Old Norse. So I just thought that was really, really cool. But Mexican Gothic on the whole, I gave it 4 stars. I didn't have any 5-star reads this month. I think what I loved most about this was not the writing. Let's just get it out of the way. I didn't think the writing was particularly anything special. However, I really, really loved the ideas and the structures, and the kind of framework of commentary that was going on in here was so interesting, so poignant, and so well done in my opinion. Mexican Gothic is a Gothic book. It takes all the tropes of the Gothic and uses them, repeats them. There's a lot of repetition of like secrets, mysteries, architecture, damsels in distress, gross, disgusting things, sometimes ghosts, sometimes haunting family members. It deals with family secrets, family drama. I'll very briefly tell you the summary. We are following our protagonist Noemi, who lives in Mexico City. She's very much a debutante, very much in the spotlight. She's a city gal, and then she has to voyage to the countryside or away from Mexico City somewhere because she receives a distressing letter from her cousin Catalina, who has just married an Englishman and has written a very unusual letter that has kind of triggered Noemi's family to be very, very scared for her and worried about her. So Noemi arrives at High Place, which is the manor in the Gothic mansion where all of this book goes down basically, and she very quickly descends into the madness that the house kind of works to create. And the atmosphere of this book, I adored the atmosphere. The atmosphere, 10 out of 10. Spookiness, 10 out of 10. Disgusting factor, 10 out of 10. I don't think any of the characters were particularly well written, and the relationships between everyone in this book, as in dialogue and dialectical relationships, I think were very weak. I found a lot of the dialogue to be very stilted and kind of rickety and rockety, like one of those old wooden roller coasters. A lot of it felt very silly if you yourself were to say it out loud or tried to say it to someone in real life, so it felt very fabricated. However, what I did like was kind of the overarching relationships of the family. This book deals with a lot of like what I want to call architectural nostalgia, and it was so interesting. I love books that deal with architecture and structures, as in buildings, and especially houses, which I know is a trope of the Gothic and whatnot, but this one, what this author does with these structures is just insane. She like takes it to this whole new level, and I'm not going to spoil anything, but I just think that was such a cool, phenomenal idea. Was this idea, like the house itself was this seat of nostalgia, and if you read this book you know what I'm talking about, but I'm not going to say anything more than that. I think it was terrifically gross, disgusting. She didn't shy away from trying to shock you and the reader and everything like that. It deals with a lot of like really, really good commentary about colonialism and what basically this family, the Doyle family in this book, what they've done, what their lineage has done. They've come over from England to Mexico and they've planted themselves literally at High Place, and they run this now abandoned silver mine, and there's just a lot of really, really cool talk concerning the house and what goes on in this book about colonialism and the devastating effects. I just think it was like brilliant. The other ideas in here that made this my favorite book of the month were things she decided to discuss about ancestry and memories and generations of the family and kind of what can crop up, what can occur, the trauma that is passed down, and looking at it in two different lights as well, always looking at it through the Doyle family, and of course our main character Noemi, looking at it from her perspective and her family and what the families are doing to each other was just so interesting. Memory, I love when memory sits on a very high place in a book and takes this huge, huge role, and this book, it just like literally, it like came alive. I don't want to say anything more, but there's so much I would love to discuss. This is also, of course, the Dark Academics book of the month. It's going to be this month, September, that you're watching this, and it will be discussed more on Lucy's channel over on Crescent Pages at the end of the month. So if you'd like to see us all break down this book, I have so many more things to say, spoilery things that I don't want to tell you right now. So I think the last thing I want to say that was just outstanding and brilliant as well, and the ideas that she plays around with are just so fascinating to me, was like this intersection or this kind of segue between structure and sentience and humans and humankind, and kind of, I've already talked about a little bit of this building and this outer work, and then via what's inside and what's inhabiting it, but also what's inhabiting the structure itself. It's really, really cool. Overall, my kind of thoughts on it: writing's not great, characters aren't great, the ideas and what really, really builds this book is like out of this world. So that is Mexican Gothic. One of the books that I got to read for myself this month was this really, really amazing book, and it actually doesn't have any words in it at all. Its artwork is beautiful. There's so many more works from this author that I want to read now, and that is The Arrival by Shaun Tan. So this is a completely and wholly illustrated book detailing our main character, who is of course nameless, who moves to a new country for the first time, and it essentially documents the immigrant experience through art and illustration and graphics. It is completely amazing. It is so good. It actually made me cry. The artwork in here and what Shaun Tan leaves to your imagination and leaves the reader to work out through his images it was just so well done. And I think because I haven't had that experience very much, of course we read books all the time and the word and the text is there for us to interpret, but I don't really get a lot of chances very often to do that via just pictures. And this was just, it blew me away. The art style was incredible. I think I talked about how it blended a little bit of magical realism into these experiences and into these more often than not true stories that Shaun Tan has taken and decided to work into his book. Was amazing, amazing, amazing. I gave it 4 stars. I absolutely loved it. It was also such it was a very heartwarming and heartbreaking just book of like connections between people, how people help people when their geography is discombobulated and disassembled, what basically taking down a life and starting to build up a new one in someplace new, sometimes with some unexpected, very strange creaturely friends is like. And I can't praise this enough. Really, really highly recommend. I love this. Another book that I really, really loved this month, this is a book that I've been reading for such a long time and I got to finish it in August, was A Midsummer Night's Dream by Shakespeare. I have been meaning to read this play for forever, and I finally finished it up. It's a very, 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 very short comedy. I was actually a bit disappointed with this, I think just because it was pretty much a Shakespeare play that everyone says is probably their favorite. It was just so hyped up. I was like, this is gonna be tremendous, and it was, but I think it was just very, very short. I don't think a lot of what I was really wanting from Shakespeare and expecting from Shakespeare was present. However, I will say it was just incredibly magical. So many flowers and figures and phases of the moon in here. It was just amazing. If you want a wild time in a forest outside of Athens, I would definitely recommend this book. Basically, the play opens with a couple from Greek myth, Theseus and Hippolyta, on their wedding night, and they're gonna have a band of actors perform a play, and then we have these 4 other lovers who are all arguing because there's some relationships that aren't going the way some people think they should. So they all escape into the forest outside of Athens, where kind of unbeknownst to them there lives a host of fairies, and of course the fairy king and the fairy queen, and then just madness and chaos and just a whole host of shenanigans ensues, basically. One of my favorite words that I learned from A Midsummer Night's Dream is misgraffed or misgraffed. It's so cool because it means mismatched, and of course misgraft, you think of like something attaching or growing on something else, and if something's misgraft, it's just kind of growing where it ought not to be or something like that. Anyway, I can't obviously praise Shakespeare's language enough. It was amazing, beautiful, beautiful, but I just think I got a little bit bored. Definitely not my favorite Shakespeare play, but I did love it. All right, so I think we're gonna move into some young adult books that I read this month. I actually got to finish off 2 series, which never ever happens, but these are series that I actually started in 2020, that was weird, which also makes it more of a rarity. And the first one I finished was Obsidio by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. Yes, this was the 3rd book in the Illuminae Files trilogy, and I loved it. They're all so good. I talk about these all the time. Do make sure if you decide to read them and go through them, they are multimedia format books, sci-fi, young adult, in space, taken down capitalism. I do recommend listening to the audiobooks along with them because they are full cast and they will just basically destroy every other audiobook experience you will have after them, but it's really, really worth it because it's amazing. I do think for me, Obsidio, at least the ending, was a bit of a letdown, I want to say. But definitely just the whole thing, it like just pulls at your heartstrings the whole way along, and there's so many relationships and people you're rooting for. I still think my favorite is definitely the second one, but Obsidio was amazing. Another 4-star book. For the first half of August, almost, yeah, for like the whole first half of the month, I only had 4-star reads, and I was just having the best time of my life, which leads me into probably, it might be my favorite young adult book I read this month. I had so much luck with young adult, which is crazy because if you watch my vlogs, you know all the time I'm just so let down and crushed, and I have so many problems with them. But the other 4-star book I got to read this month, young adult, was The Blood Spell by CJ Redwine. I was so impressed with this book. I found this just hanging out on Libby. I had never heard of the author or her works before, but she writes a lot of fairy tale and myth retelling, folklore retelling. So The Blood Spell is a Cinderella retelling infused with magic and just a whole host of like alchemical amazingness. There's so many scenes of like flowers and potion making because our main character Blue, who is Cinderella, has magic. However, she has to hide the fact that she does because the people in the town where she lives and in this kingdom, they all despise people who have magic, and they actually execute them if someone is found to be a witch, because years ago there was a blood wraith or a witch who turned evil and she devastated the streets and she killed their children and she ate their croissants, and it was all a bad time. So now everyone hates magic. So Blue kind of has to hide this fact, but she uses her magic just to basically have a really great garden in her backyard, and it's literally the best thing ever. This was one of the coziest young adult fantasy books I've ever read. I didn't want to finish it because it just put me in like such a good headspace. It was a really cleansing experience. I have no idea why. It was just so pure and sweet and happy, and you are rooting for your two main characters just the whole way through. Basically, we have Blue, Cinderella, and she works with her father in their shop making kind of potions and tinctures and herbs for the royal family, as well as a whole other host of loyal customers. And then our other main character, Kellen, is the crown prince, and he has just come of age, so he must select a bride to basically be queen once his mother kind of resigns from the throne. So Blue and Kellen have known each other since childhood, but basically since they were born they've always been bitter rivals and they detest one another. Basically Blue is like the biggest tattletale, Kellen just wants to have a good old time, and they hate each other. So it's just really fun following their relationship through the whole book. It was so good. I also want to really praise this young adult book because one of the reasons I also loved it so much was that it deals with trauma in such a believable, continuous way. My biggest problem in a lot of young adult books is that something devastating and something awful and something horrific will happen to one of our main characters or a main character, and it's discussed once and then it's dropped and never talked about again. We never see their feelings progress through these issues. Most of the time I'm talking about like death of a parent, death of a loved one, loss in some way, just anything traumatic that happens to them. It's maybe discussed one time and it's not handled well and it's not brought throughout the book, whereas The Blood Spell really dealt with these issues in such a mature, continuous way, and you see the development, and it was just really good. It also has sign language in it, which I've never ever come across a young adult book that had a character who used sign language to communicate, and it was just all good, glowing, fragrant things to say about this book. I loved it. It was amazing. It was great. 10 out of 10. I feel like I also just want to talk so much more about it because it was such a breezy, beautiful book. It's set in this like sparkling, cozy, cute town right next to the sea, and Blue has her garden and she cooks and she goes on adventures, and it was just like exactly what I needed. It was so fun and so cozy, and I loved it. So unfortunately we now have to move along to a young adult book that was the exact opposite of this in every single way and let me down. I gave it 2 stars, and that was An Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson. I've seen that this has been pretty popular on booktube recently, I think. Maybe. So I saw that it was available on Libby and I wanted to see what all the fuss was about, and it was not about very much. Let's start with the word that I learned from this book, which was eldritch. Am I saying that right? Eldritch. eldritch, which means weird and sinister or ghostly, originating from the 16th century Scots, actually, the language, so super cool. However, the book was not super cool. This is a young adult fairy romance, and that's basically all you get. It's a very, very short book, and it is just 100% fairy romance. I wasn't totally adverse to that, but unfortunately, first of all, the plot, are we going in for the plot? Not really, but the romance, which is what you're going in for, was just actually really, really bad. So we're following this mortal girl named Isabel, and she is a very, 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 very gifted painter. That was probably my favorite thing. The only thing I really want to praise about this book is that, like, seeing through the eyes of our protagonist painter was very, very interesting, especially because where she lives in her town, it is summer all of the time. So when she accidentally paints human emotion onto the face of one of the princes of the fairylands, the Autumn Court, she is unfortunately taken away from her home and held for trial, basically, for committing this crime, because fairies are not supposed to show human emotion. So yeah, that was basically the only thing I really enjoyed about it, was seeing her experience autumn for the first time through the use of, like, all of these colors and all of these painting desires, and it was just really, really nice. Unfortunately, the romance was just, it was not good, just not good. I found it not compelling at all. I didn't care. I kind of wish I hadn't read it, but here we are. Is that all I want to say about it? I think that's all I want to say. Let's move on. The other series that I got to finish off this month was the Truly Devious series by Maureen Johnson. So I read The Hand on the Wall, which is the last book. You find out who done it, how the mystery ends, how Stevie, our main detective character, wraps it up, and I really enjoyed it. I gave it 3.5 stars, I think. I gave the whole series 3.5 stars. Once again, this was a really, really cozy book because this is a young adult murder mystery dealing with a murder mystery in the present, as well as a murder mystery set in the 1930s, all atop a mountain in Vermont, where Ellingham Academy, a very prestigious school, has been built up to basically educate a whole bunch of very prestigious teenagers. So I just thought it was super cozy. I love Maureen Johnson's descriptions of, like, just nature and Vermont and maple syrup, and it was great. My favorite word that I learned from The Hand on the Wall was immurement. That didn't sound correct. Immurement. Wait, immurement? Immurement. This is actually bad. Immurement. Immurement? It must be immurement. I don't know, English is stupid. Anyway, it means to enclose or confine someone against their will. And that's a pretty good place to start. If you've read the Truly Devious series, you know there's a lot going on with, like, tunnels and confined closed spaces, claustrophobia, these little tight nooks and crannies leading to death and murder. So that's a pretty good word for this book. Found in the English language in 16th century, it comes from both the French, émuré, and medieval Latin, because murus in Latin means wall. So really, really cool. This is also a young adult series that I really, really liked, so pretty happy about that. Moving on. The last young adult book I read in August actually might be my favorite. It was so good. It is a young adult dystopian called The Marrow Thieves. I have a lot of things I want to say about this. It is a dystopian, but I'm just like so, I just like close out young adult dystopian at this point because I've read so many of them, and so many of the times they're so silly. This one was just amazing though, because first of all, it was a dystopian where the dystopia is brought about by climate change. This whole book is so scarily real, and it's so gripping and so important, and it was amazing. So basically in this book, what has happened is basically just what's happening right now. There was wars for water, there was this huge plague that's gone on, this virus that spread to basically everyone, and now what is happening when this book begins is that unfortunately people of the world, the whole world, can no longer dream. They are dreamless beings. When they go to sleep at night, they see nothing in their heads. And as people are trying to rebuild the world and their countries and their communities, they are finding that they're becoming so depressed and so sad and so obsessed with their dreamless state. This leads them to go after and target, at least in Canada where this book is set, it's also by a Canadian author, this leads them to go after the Indigenous people in Canada who are now fleeing for their lives because they can dream. And what these people are doing, what everyone else in the world is doing, is hunting them down to steal their bone marrow, because the dreams are stored in the bone marrow. So it's just this really, this novel becomes such like a useful, fruitful place to discuss these huge ideas. And the author of this book is by Sherry Demeline. She just uses like everything going on, the dystopia and this hunting of Indigenous people, as a place to basically talk about what has already happened in the past, and the racism and the abuse and the horrific things that have gone on in Canada, and what has been done to basically the Indigenous people. If you don't know about the residential schools and everything like that that went on in Canada, this is what Sherry Demeline in this book, The Marrow Thieves, is trying to discuss, and uses this really just useful, scary place to discuss both the past and the present and the future. In this book, we're following a whole host of people as they're running for their lives, basically trying to survive in the wilderness, and they're all heading north to hopefully try and band together and create a community. Mostly we are following our main character, Francis, whose whole family has been taken away from him, so he is running for his life when he is swept up and picked up into this other group of survivors who are making their way north as well. And you follow them through their journey. They tell you their stories. So many of their stories are focused in this dystopian world, but they are so reminiscent, and like the details of the stories, if you just don't take it at surface level and kind of dig a little deeper, their stories just reflect like the past trauma and everything that went on, and their survival stories from these residential schools and from this time period in Canada where it was just horrifying things going on. So it was just so it's just so interesting, so important, and she did like such a good job with it. I've seen no one else talk about this book, and I just think it was so good. I gave it 4 stars. I kind of wish like just so many more young adult books, or books in general, were like this, because like Mexican Gothic as well, I just love books who deal with these like ideas and they kind of take them out of context and put them somewhere else. And of course, like so many great novels do this, and it just makes you think so much. It makes you examine and really look closely and kind of look underneath, and just The Marrow Thieves was so good. Highly recommend. I read another book of Greek myth retelling. This time it's a very short, semi-illustrated children's book called Demeter and Persephone. So basically just the myth of Demeter and Persephone and Hades, and why the seasons change, how the Greeks explain that to themselves via their mythology. This is by Hugh Lupton and Daniel Morden. I have another book from them on my shelf called The Adventures of Odysseus, all about the Odyssey, with really beautiful illustrations. This one was a much shorter myth. I know there's really not a lot to tell and like kind of discuss with it, but I was a little disappointed by just how short it was. However, the illustrations are amazing. They are so beautiful. Yeah, they're just really stunning. I love this artwork, especially this one page where they detail all of the Greek gods, and just I think the design is just so great. I don't know how great it would be to read for yourself, but I definitely recommend if like you have a younger children who are interested in Greek mythology or something like that. I think these are like really nice places to start, because they're great. So that was another one I read this month. I definitely read like quite a wide, sometimes weird variety of books this month, because the next one I read is called Queen's Shadow by E.K. Johnston. I always do this. It's one of those two. Let's start with some fun words. The word I learned is gregarious, which means fond of company or very sociable. However, something I didn't know with this word was that it can also apply to plants and animals. So you can call like animals gregarious if they naturally occur in flocks, or if they flock to one another, which is very interesting, because I guess gregarious is kind of a human flocking as well, but a decisive human flocking. It can also apply to plants if they grow naturally together in clusters, or if they have pure associations. So like trees. You could call a tree gregarious because they more often than not grow next to each other and like to grow in clusters and with their friends, which I just thought was like the nicest thing ever. I love language. And it just comes from the 17th century Latin, literally gregarious, which means flock-like. So very cool. Anyway, back to Queen Shadow. This is a Star Wars story set right after The Phantom Menace, and we are following Padme along with her I think it's four other handmaidens, right after kind of the Battle of Naboo has gone down, and she is now having to step back from the throne, but of course she's then asked to be a senator, and it's just 100% Star Wars politics. I actually kind of like this. I think it's definitely a story you have to go in knowing, though, that it's going to be all Star Wars politics. Otherwise you're going to get very, very bored, and to be honest, not really a lot happens in this book. However, I'm just glad that it exists, because I would basically read anything that had like anything to do with like Padme or Princess Leia or anyone else in Star Wars who doesn't really get a lot for themselves. So I'm glad this exists. I know there's a sequel, I believe. It was nice too to kind of see the relationships between the guards and the royal decoys and everything like that, because you really don't get any of that in the films. So that was Queen's Shadow. The last work of fiction I read this month is a little bit of a disappointment, but then we're gonna move into some nonfiction where like there were some really, really great books. So this was a bit of a disappointment, and that is Good Omens by Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman. If you've never heard of this, very quick rundown. The apocalypse. It's happening right now. An angel and a demon, Crowley and Aziraphale, decide that no, the apocalypse is not going to happen right now. So they basically do everything in their power to stop the Antichrist from destroying the planet and killing humanity and making heaven and hell go to war for forever. So what I didn't like about this was that the humor that was used to drive the whole plot along and to make the whole plot a thing was not particularly funny to me, in that I found it funny, or I found myself finding it funny. I was like, yes, this is funny. Do I think it's funny? No, that doesn't make any sense, but that's how I felt. I adore Monty Python, and I think not that there's anything wrong with trying to emulate or style yourself after that kind of humor, but like I just don't think it really fully worked. I'm not sure if it was the book format. I'm not sure if it was the way this whole book just felt like a whole bunch of humorous scenes stitched together in what could vaguely be a whole bunch of different short stories occurring, that it didn't really feel so much like a book, but more like a series of skits that kind of fell flat once they were all placed next to each other. I'm not really sure. I was also kind of hoping there was actually going to be more between Crowley and Aziraphale. I don't know why I thought that it was going to be the huge main focus thing of this book, but I just wish there had been more of them, because they were my favorite ones to kind of read about or listen to. So something I did like about this was the way it discussed kind of determinism, humanity's place, religion, what kind of good and evil, what they really are, and what those philosophies kind of mean. However, on the whole, I didn't really get along with it. I still give it 3 stars because of course it's the writing is great, but I just don't think it was anything super special. All right guys, so my favorite nonfiction book of the month, this was amazing. This was one of my favorite books of the month as well. It's absolutely stunning. I love it. It's just great. And that is The Silk Roads by Peter Frankopan, A New History of the World. I kind of went into this not really knowing exactly what would unfold. I thought it was just going to be about the Silk Roads, basically their geography, their role, and kind of end point, nowhere near my timeline or our timeline, but it was a whole explanation of humankind's history from start to now via the East and the Silk Roads, because everything is just so connected. The way that he details and sets out this book, it kind of starts off and you're not really sure where it's going, because it's kind of a very fast-paced tour through history via the Silk Roads, via the products they produced, via the people who want them, and it's just a little bit horrifying on one part and on one hand, I guess, because you see kind of the exact same things happening over and over and over again in the wheel of time, in our timeline, in human history. Everything just seems to be going in a circle. No one is learning from anything. So in that sense, it was very, very disheartening for me. And at times it was actually a little rough to read about. It made me so angry, especially as this book kind of approaches modern day and approaches where we are now, and it details so much of what colonial powers have done, how they've either exploited, begged, betrayed, deceived, taken, whatever they want, specifically from the East and from the Silk Roads, which still exist today. Just they've taken on so many different transformations, and they've taken on so many new meanings, and they hold so many different products, if you even want to say that. And it's just such a well-rounded, good study that can also make you very, very sad. I think that this book offers like just so much hope, because it really decentralizes everything that we've taken to be so integral and so central and so important and kind of the focal point of the world. It takes the map and it like turns it around. It just kind of rips it up, and it's just so good. There's so many interesting things in here. It is quite a long ride, but it was so good. Definitely one of the best nonfiction books I've ever read. I would really, really highly recommend. It was incredible. The word that I learned from this book is probably one that everyone knows, but I didn't, and that is ingot. I had no idea what the word ingot means, but if you, like me, don't know, it is a block of steel, gold, silver, or other metal, originating in late Middle English, which is really cool, from the word in and Old English gotten, which meant to pour or cast. So literally to be like poured in and casted in, which is really, really cool. So every single chapter of this book takes the Silk Road from the time that it was created and made to these now imaginary and online and kind of vaguely still there, these traces of the old Silk Road and these new dents of the new one. And it was just so good. Every single chapter of this book is called the road to something, and the road to something that was like the road to X, where X was like the most important thing that was going on in human history at the time. So the road to heaven via like the religious wars that were going on, the road of gold when gold was the thing that was sought after, the road of silver, the road to war, the wheat road, I love bread, the bread road, the road to genocide, the road of cold warfare. So it's just so good. It was so good. It taught me so many things I didn't even know I needed to be taught, and I'm really, really grateful for the book. It was great. It was great. It was good. I read a couple other types of nonfiction this month. The first one was called The Fire This Time. This is a collection of essays. Yeah, I think it's all essays with a little bit of poetry, which was cool. These are compiled by Jesmyn Ward, and it's also called A New Generation Speaks About Race. So it's a whole bunch of like essays, wonderful, wonderful essays talking about race in America, what it's like living as a Black person in America, a whole bunch of different issues, really specific essays, which are so interesting. Each of these essays took sometimes one or two ideas and just expanded them so beautifully, so nicely, talked about them so in depth. This is also a very hard book to read. A lot of the nonfiction books were just really hard to read, but just so necessary. It was so great. The word that I learned from The Fire This Time was Quixotic. Am I saying that right? Quixotic, which means extremely idealistic and unrealistic. The kind of etymology of this word is just fabulous because it comes from 18th century and it literally just derives from Don Quixote, the author. So Quixotic, I just thought that was great. So funny, loved it. And finally, the last nonfiction and the last book I read in August was called 1,000 Miles to Freedom. This was about our author's journey. She's using a pen name, about her struggles living in North Korea, what it's like to live in North Korea, and then what it is like to escape from North Korea, and what it is like to build a new life, decide how to build a life, decide where to build a life. It was really interesting just learning a little bit about the education system, the government, the military, and then kind of what surrounding and periphery countries to North Korea are doing, how they either accept, deny, or how they use this kind of refugee status. It's just really definitely eye-opening, and especially seeing like how does one escape from North Korea and how awful and hard it is, and just like the way she writes is really just compelling, and you feel so much for her. You feel like you're with her, and it was really, I don't want to say good because it's not good, but it was like, it's not a book that I'm going to forget, I think is what I mean by that. That was 1,000 Miles to Freedom. So those were all of the books I read this month. I hope you had a really yummy snack or drink. I'm almost done this orange cinnamon tea and it is so good. Let me know what your favorite book of the month was. I always love writing down what you guys' favorite books are because then I get to the hair just went in my coffee. Tea, ew. Because I always love writing down what your guys' favorite books are so then I can get some new recommendations too. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you're having a cozy night wherever you are. I'm about to go make some dinner and yeah, I'm gonna go look up what awning means now. But I'll see you very shortly in my next video. Yes.